everybody. So for this video, I would like to go over stress. I will go into the topics of what it actually does to your brain, what it does to your body, what it does for your mental health, and different ways that our bodies tend to store stress. So what is stress? In a previous video, I discussed anxiety. While anxiety is exposure to chronic stress, stress is the thing that leads to that. So stress is typically the process by which the person is perceiving and responding to a certain event or stressor, and after they experience or they're vulnerable to it or exposed to it, then they appraise it as threatening or challenging. That is the final definition, and I'll go over the different kinds of theories that led up to that conclusion, and etc. So Walter Cannon believed that it was a disturbance of the homeostasis, which is basically the balance and the harmony, so to speak, of our body and our chemistry and our biology. And on an experiment by Seale, he did it with rat injections. He injected stress hormones into rats, and what they found was that the adrenal cortexes were enlarged, there were shrinking in immune structures, and there were stomach ulcers exacerbating from it. So while it does kind of stem off and support the homeostasis theory by another psychologist, it shows that it has not only mental effects, but it kind of veers into a physical effect and aftermath. When it came to Folkman and Lazarus, which is kind of more of the modern adaptation of what stress is and actually played a big role into the way it was officially put as a definition, is that it's appraisal and coping. So it's only stressful when the person appraises the situation as such. So they believe that the stress is a product of the person and the environment. So the two coincide, it gets appraised, it gets thought through, and if the person perceives it as stressful, therefore the physiological reactions and psychological reactions come into play. But if they do not perceive it as stressful, then they will not have a stress event manifesting within their body or within their mind. Biologically, two pathways are activated. The first, which I have mentioned before and is very commonly used, is the parasympathetic nervous system. In the parasympathetic nervous system, two things are secreted: norepinephrine and epinephrine. And what those do is that they increase heart rate and respiration, they increase blood flow to the muscles, your blood pressure, etc. So it creates a bodily reaction to the situation. It causes a bodily reaction to the emotion of stress. And it stems a little bit more from that flight or fight thing, which I will go into right now. The second pathway that's activated biologically is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So it has to do with your hypothalamus, it has to do with your pituitary glands, and it has to do with your adrenal glands. And through that, basically, cortisol and adrenal secretions are let out. So that goes more to the hormonal secretions, the hormonal, psychological kind of internal mechanisms. So one pathway that's activated is within the body, while the other is activated in the response and the outer manifestation of these things and this entire process outside of the body. In an evolutionary standpoint, it goes back to the flight or fight. So they believe that stress was meant to serve the organism responding to it, whether it be an animal or a human being, that it was needed to promote survival. So it's something that has carried on since then, and it's meant to keep the organism alive. It's meant to keep the organism moving in case there's a dangerous situation. But like when it came to the parasympathetic nervous system getting, activated, they believe that nowadays it's a little bit more internal, and it's more about a person internalizing and appraising it more so than an external environmental factor triggering it, such as a survival instinct kicking in if an animal is about to chase you, or a prey was going to be chased by a predator in the animal kingdom. But now it's a little bit more of an external thing too, but a little bit more of that appraisal. That's why the Folkman and Lazarus theory is a little bit more held up and a little bit more consistent with today's modern times. It is great short term. Stress is good short term, but it is actually really bad long term because it does have a lot of different effects. So once the stressor is gone, if the stress permeates and it's a consistent thing, thriving in the organism's body, it can cause a lot of different things to happen physically. So one of the things that can happen is that it can damage the brain and organs. It can start eating up at different parts of the organs because of all the adrenal glands and all the cortisol secretions are going through the body, and the neurotransmitters. They're all going through the body in a weird way, in an excessive amount, when our body needs to maintain that homeostasis. It needs to maintain that balance. So when it's out of balance and too much into the stress, it can take a toll on the organs, it can take a toll on the brain structures. It can inhibit growth. There are studies that suggest that children exposed to very stressful situations, with a specific study in World War II era, it inhibited the growth of children, and a lot of children were not able to physically get taller, or their organs would shrink, or their organs would stay small when they would grow. There's a lot of factors that can play into how stress can affect growth. There's neuronal damage to the hippocampus, which is something I want to emphasize. As, for example, students typically stress a lot during exam time. But the thing is, while they are stressed because it seems important to pass the exams, and of course it's very valid and understandable, it is important to remember to take care of oneself if they are stressing over exams, because if they're not taking care of themselves during that time, they can actually slowly be deteriorating their hippocampus, and their hippocampus is responsible for learning and memory. So while the person is studying, but they're stressed, like excessively stressed, then it starts fogging up and deteriorating the neuronal connections that go into the hippocampus that allows a person to learn new information and be able to retain that information necessary to carry on into their exam. It can also deteriorate the immune system if someone is exposed to stress so often, because again, the norepinephrine, the epinephrine, the cortisol, the adrenal secretions, all of that can take its toll on the immune system, and when the immune system is suppressed, people are more susceptible to getting sick. So right now, how we are facing the pandemic of COVID-19, it is important to do our best to cope with the stress that is exposed out there, to cope with the uncertainty of the pandemic, because if everyone is stressed out right now during this, their immune system is going to go down and they can be a little bit more susceptible to catching it. So it's very important to keep yourself in check with that, to keep others in check with that. Even sometimes it's easy to lose sight, but it's important to maintain. Cardiovascular diseases can also manifest through excessive stress in life, so your heart can take a toll. So it's important, very, very important, to take care of your stress response, because it does have physical effects to the individual's health and well-being. So it's very important to take this into consideration and pass this information forward in order to not deteriorate your body, or allow someone you see stressed out to deteriorate their body over something that can be responded to in a different way in order to better enable the person to be healthy and not have any long-term effects after the fact. The mental health things that manifest from stress is the fact that stress can induce or exacerbate certain mental illnesses that are already existing or that haven't really manifested. So it won't help anybody who has depression, schizophrenia, panic, or eating disorders. It can even create those to form because maybe it's a stress response. Someone may cope with that, or they may become a little bit more paralyzed by the emotions, so they'll become depressed. Or schizophrenic, it can get into severe cases where it can cause schizophrenia in an individual because their brain is just going haywire. And if certain parts of the brain, if brain structures are getting deteriorated, it can severely be the ones that are linked to schizophrenic individuals, such as the ventricles, gray matter. So it's very important to make sure that you take care of yourself, because no one wants to get out of a stressful situation with a situation that they can't really handle in the long term. And well, they can, but that they don't need to have to deal with if it can be reversed or treated or walked through. And panic disorders are very closely linked to stress. Like I said in the previous video when it came to anxiety, how one of the anxiety disorders falls with panic disorder, and panic disorder has to do with the parasympathetic system response. So it's important to take care of oneself, because no one wants to develop any of the physical shortcomings and disorders or mental disorders after this. Stress can be necessary in a sense where it promotes survival and it's in little things, but given the day and age we live in, how typically we're no longer having to run from animals in the jungle, or we're having to run from elements out there that were really exasperated in older times, like when we were barely evolving, when we were barely becoming civilized and becoming human civilizations. Though those situations and those circumstances are not necessarily always there. So while people may be afraid and such, their body's going to react the same way. It hasn't evolved very much. So it's important to not let that consume you or consume the other person, given the fact that it's not very helpful to react that way when the stressors aren't necessarily promoting survival. It's just something that ruminates in a human being and hasn't quite adapted to the uniqueness of different situations and constructs that are going on in the modern day and age, if that makes sense. It can store in your body, believe it or not. So a lot of ailments and pains are actually linked to stress, and your emotions do get stored in your body. They can manifest as a mental health issue, they can manifest as a physical issue, and all of that coincides, it lingers around. So I'm going to tell you exactly where it can be stored in the body and what emotion is caused by that when it's linked to stress. So there are 10 different ways where, in different places that stress gets stored in the body. The first is the lower back. When the stress is involving an emotion of anger, it gets stored in the lower back. And second is the stomach and intestines. When fear is the root of the stress, the stomach and intestines take a toll. All of the effects will take that. So someone might have a stomach ache, or their stomach will be turning, or they'll have digestive issues. The third is the heart and chest. When it's a heart and chest, if someone is stressing over something that hurts, for example, if it's a heartache, a breakup, or a loss, and that's ruminating constantly in a stress response, then the heart and chest store that stress. A headache, when it manifests as a headache, it's because there's a stress response to a loss of control. If it's in the neck and shoulder tension, if that's manifesting inside of your body or inside of someone's body, it's because of the stress of burdens and responsibilities in life. If it's shown in fatigue, for example, if someone is very fatigued from the stress, it's because the stress is linked to resentments that the individual is experiencing. If it shows up as numbness, if all of a sudden the person knows that they're going through something stressful or an event or a period in their life, and they feel numbness, there's actually not a pain but a numbness, it's linked to trauma. So there's some sort of trauma inducing that stress response within the body. Number 8, if it manifests as breathing difficulties, that's because the stress is showing up as anxiety, or there is anxiety that is linked to the stress. And number 9, if there are voice or throat problems going on that aren't linked to, for example, a cold or anything like that, but there's like some sort of strain inside of the person's vocal cords or throats, that is linked to some sort of oppression that the person is feeling. They're stressed about some sort of oppression in an area of their life. 10, insomnia. If there's insomnia going on in the person that's experiencing stress, it's because their stress response is that they are feeling like there is a loss of self. There's a little bit of a loss of who they are or their identity. So this is very important, and this is very interesting because it can help you become a little bit more aware with your emotional integration, and you can understand and better understand another individual who's experiencing stored stress in their body. So if they're experiencing stored stress, they can be able to link it to what emotion it may be correlated to, as I listed earlier. And if it's correlated to that certain specific feeling, they can address that feeling and get to the root cause of it and uncover a couple things and be able to face it and nourish themselves in those areas in life. Give themselves a little bit of extra attention that they need in that area of their life so that certain feeling isn't getting stored and stuck in the body. And if once you assess it, once you identify it, or even if you just know it's there and you're working on it, you can also coincide this with being able to release those feelings. So in order for those to not be stored and ruminating inside those areas of your body, and you need to release them, there's ways of doing that that won't hurt yourself or hurt others. So find some sort of catharsis, whether that be taking an exercising class, a boxing class, dancing, remodeling something, building, renovating, things like that, running around, something that's healthy and that won't put anyone, including yourself, in danger. Therapy is also very good if the stress is exasperating in other ways or it's something that's interfering with your everyday life. Going to a counselor or a therapist can be very helpful because it's important to let out those feelings and maybe be able to understand them if you need to be guided through and walked through with that. Expressing it too. Sometimes it's a little hard, and sometimes a lot of people are afraid of being vulnerable with their emotions, given a lot of other things that led up to that moment. So it's important to express yourself, because if someone doesn't express themselves and they constantly suppress their emotions over and over again, it gets stored and it gets bottled up. So it's important for that person to express it, whether it be out loud to other individuals if they need to, or if they need to give themselves time in their day and carve out time in their day to just let it all out, or just be, actually sit with the emotion and let it be rather than trying to shove it aside. Another way could be talking. If you have a trusted support group, you have friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, whatever it may be, people that you can trust, talk about the things that are causing you to store that stress. Talk about the stressors that are going on in your life, and that can actually in itself help a lot so it doesn't get stored in your mind and inside of your body. And those are the best ways to do it. You can integrate that along with therapy, along with understanding yourself, and I think it helps a lot to know where it stores in the body. I think the best way to start is noticing where it stores in the body. Then you can go off of the feeling and emotion. Then you can let out whatever you need to let out in a safe and calm way that won't hurt yourself or others. Because I don't want anybody to have to go through anything in their life where they feel alone, or they feel like the stress is overtaking them and making them lose sense of their self, their life, or their happiness, or it takes them away from their happiness. Because you are in control of this. You are bigger than stress. You are bigger than any stressful event there is out there. And if this, touches base with you, if this hits home for you, I hope that the stress gets alleviated, and it can and it will. Just know how to cope with it, know how it manifests, and after that you have a blueprint to be able to tackle this and be able to guide yourself to a less stressful or better responses to stress for your own well-being and your own health. I hope this video has been helpful. I hope you can pass it forward if you feel that there's anybody going through stress. Whatever it may be, thank you very much for watching, and have a good mental health day. Thank you.